Welcome back, night wanderers, to Nakora Nights. The Appalachian Mountains aren't just old, they're alive. Every trail, every hollow, every shadowed ridge carries a story. And some of those stories never should have been witnessed at all. Tonight, we're stepping straight into the darkness with 10 true Appalachian scary encounters. Real moments where ordinary people came face to face with things that should not exist. A pair of glowing eyes watching hikers from the ridge. A cabin door that opened itself at 2 in the morning. And footsteps circling a tent, even though no one else was out there. These aren't legends. These are encounters that left people shaken, terrified, and forever changed. But before we head up the mountain together, tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because in Appalachia, nighttime is when the forest truly wakes up. If you're ready to step off the path and into the unknown, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. I'm not alone. Now, stay quiet, keep your eyes on the tree line, and whatever you hear behind you, don't turn around. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing True Appalachian Scary Encounters Horror Stories. Let's begin. My name is Mason, and when this happened, I was 14, stuck between parents who argued so much that home felt more like a storm than a place where a kid should sleep. My life back then was all slammed doors and whispered fights that were never really whispered, and I felt like a ghost walking from room to room, unseen and unheard. So when my mom's older cousin, a man named Clyde, offered to take me out to the hills for a while, I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Clyde was the sort of person who lived close to the ground, the kind who hunted deer in the fall and carved whistles out of river driftwood, the kind who said the mountains had their own rules if you listened long enough. He was rough around the edges, but he cared in a quiet way, the way someone might put an extra blanket on you without saying anything. He said he had a small place way up in the high ridges past a forgotten settlement called Weeping Rock, a place barely on any map. He said he wanted to show me how to read the land, how to start a fire with just a spark, how to understand when the forest was calm and when it wasn't. I was so eager to get away from the yelling at home that I shoved clothes in my backpack without checking if they matched. Then I followed him out the door. The road that led there was barely a road at all, twisting dirt and broken stones that made Clyde's old truck rattle like it was trying to shake itself apart. The trees grew taller the farther we climbed, their branches hanging low like arms trying to touch us. There was no cell signal after the last gas station, no houses, just the sound of gravel crunching under the tires and the mountains closing in. It felt like the world behind me was fading away mile by mile, and some strange part of me liked that. When we finally stopped the truck, I saw the cabin for the first time. It stood in a clearing that looked carved by hand, the grass thin and patchy, the trees leaning inward like they were watching the place. The cabin itself was old, the wood dark and weathered, the windows framed by crooked boards. There was no electricity, only a rusted stove inside and a couple lanterns hanging from nails in the walls. The air smelled like damp pine and old smoke, and something about it made me think of forgotten stories. It wasn't fancy, but it felt steady, like a place where the world couldn't reach you. The first few days passed easy enough. Clyde showed me how to find creek trout hiding under rocks, how to spot deer trails, how to move quiet through the brush. We cooked over a fire behind the cabin, the flames painting the trees orange at night. For the first time in months, I slept without hearing anyone argue. That peace felt strange, almost heavy, like I wasn't used to breathing right. But peace never lasts long in the Appalachian backcountry, not in the deep parts where the hills keep shadows even in daylight, and on the fourth night, everything changed. We were sitting by the fire, roasting the last of the trout we caught earlier, when Clyde started talking about things people used to hear in these ridges. He wasn't joking or laughing, he was just staring at the flames like the story lived somewhere in them. He said there was something folks around Weeping Rock used to call the hummer, not because it was friendly, but because it made this long humming call that wasn't animal, wasn't wind, wasn't anything that should be wandering the woods after dark. He said the old stories claimed if someone heard it once, they were safe. Twice meant trouble was coming and you should go inside. But 3 times meant the thing already knew you were there, and you should never open the door no matter who knocked. I tried to act brave, tried to act like it was some tale meant to scare kids, but the way Clyde talked made me uneasy. His voice was low and steady, and he didn't smile. He didn't even blink much. I told myself it was only a story, only an old mountain tale, and later when I crawled into my bunk, I tried not to think about it. Still, something about the forest outside felt different that night, like it had shifted just a little, like it was awake. I woke in the dark with no reason for waking. My eyes snapped open like someone had touched my shoulder, even though the cabin was silent. Moonlight slit through the window and turned everything pale. The trees outside weren't moving at all, not even a branch. It felt like the woods were holding their breath, and then I heard it. A hum stretched long and rising. Not music, not whistling, not human, just this single trembling note that slid through the air like a blade. I didn't even breathe. My skin prickled all over, and the cabin felt too small, too thin, too fragile. I thought maybe it was something normal, maybe a bird or the wind or some distant generator humming, even though I knew deep down there was nothing out here to make that sound. Then it came again, closer this time, climbing the air in a way that made my stomach tighten. The whole forest went silent after it, the sort of silence that presses on your head until you feel dizzy. No crickets, no night birds, not even the far-off rustle of leaves. The third hum slid right up to the cabin wall like it was standing just outside. My heart thumped so hard it hurt. I stared at the door, waiting for something to come through it. My throat felt too tight to call out to Clyde. I forced myself to stand and move toward his room, stepping slow because I thought the wood floor might scream under my feet. His door was partly closed, the lantern he kept in there sitting cold on the table, and when I pushed it open I froze. The bed was untouched. The blanket was still folded. He wasn't there. It looked like he hadn't been there all night. A soft knock tapped on the front door. 3 light taps like someone polite. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Every hair on my neck lifted like static. Another knock came, this one harder, sharper, like whoever or whatever stood outside was growing impatient. I looked out the small window above the bed, pushing the curtain just enough to see. That's when I saw the shape by the trees. It wasn't still, wasn't moving right either, just shifting like it was trying to stand but didn't know how human legs worked. The moonlight hit it in pieces, almost like light didn't want to touch it. My lungs tightened. I ran back to the room and pushed the dresser against the door, then crawled under the bed. I stayed there with my hands shaking and my breath trapped in my chest. At some point, the knocking stopped, and the silence after felt worse, heavier, almost thoughtful. When morning light came through the window like pale fog, I finally crawled out. My legs were stiff and numb. I peeked outside again and saw something in the dirt near the porch. Footprints, bare ones. Long and wide and strange, the kind of feet that didn't belong to any person. The prints led from the woods to the steps and then away from the cabin, but they only went about 12 feet before they just stopped. No path back, no fading trail. Just an end like something lifted straight into the air. I waited all day for Clyde. No food left, water almost gone. I kept listening for footsteps that never came. My mind kept replaying the empty bed, the silent woods, the prints that ended like a story that hadn't been finished. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with a small carving knife Clyde gave me on the first day, my hands gripping it tight even though I knew it wouldn't help. A ranger found me the next afternoon, said someone had reported a truck left too long near the old ridge. He took me back down the mountain, and when I told him what happened, he didn't say anything for a while. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. According to land records, no one had lived in that cabin for almost 50 years. It had been boarded up after a fire took the family who owned it, and nobody had touched it since. He said there was no man named Clyde registered to the land, no recent activity, no signs anyone had been there. I told him he was wrong. I told him I knew where I stayed. I knew who took me there. I knew what I heard in the dark. He didn't argue. He just looked at me like he was afraid to. Sometimes at night when the wind is quiet, I swear I hear that hum again, faint and rising, like it's coming from the far edge of the world. I've grown older, taller, different, but I can't go near the Appalachians anymore, not even close. I avoid anything that smells like pine after rain, anything that feels like a memory waiting to trap me. And when someone asks why, I always tell them the same thing, even though they never believe me. Some places never let you leave, and some things never stop looking. If you've ever gone through something like this, I want to hear it, because stories like these are real to people who live them, and maybe your story can help someone else understand theirs. If you want to suggest what I should talk about next, leave it in the comments. If you haven't yet, your support matters more than you know, so like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more. I always thought fear was something that lived in the imagination, a strange shape that kids made up in the dark, but that changed the summer I turned 17. That was when I stayed with my cousin Milo in a forgotten mountain town buried deep in the Appalachian range. The place was called Crooked Valley, a town so small it didn't want to be found. People there kept to themselves, roads twisted like something alive, and even the old wooden signs felt tired, leaning as if they wanted to fall and let the forest swallow everything back. No cell service, no maps, no signals, just mountains that rose like tall, silent watchers. My uncle's house sat right at the edge of the forest, a weathered cabin with a crooked porch and old tools hanging from nails. Behind it stretched miles of dense woods, thick with brush, shadowed gaps, and strange pockets of cold air that tasted like rust. There were no fences, no paths, nothing but endless trees. The first week felt quiet in a lonely sort of way. Milo and I fished at the creek, played cards when the evenings got long, and sat outside listening to an old battery radio humming with static and old rock music. The silence in Crooked Valley wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, almost like it had weight. Even when the wind moved, the trees didn't sway much, like something was holding them in place. I got bored fast and started wandering around the property just to pass time. Milo refused to go deep into the woods. He told me the land out there wasn't right and that old ground remembers old things. Stay near the cabin, he kept saying. Some places don't want strangers. I laughed it off. I thought he was trying to spook me or keep me from getting lost. I should have listened. A few days later, while walking past a fallen log, I noticed a narrow space between two thick bushes. The leaves hung low like curtains. It didn't look like a path made by people. It looked like a path the forest made by choice. Something about it felt strange, almost like stepping through it would lead somewhere I wasn't meant to see. I went anyway. Curiosity can be a curse. After a few minutes, I started noticing the trees growing closer, not darker exactly, but tighter, like the world around me was shrinking piece by piece. The air felt cooler and stiller, the kind of stillness that feels watched. That's when I saw her. A girl sitting on a mossy rock, barefoot, long tangled hair falling around her shoulders like dark vines. She looked about my age. She didn't look at me, didn't react, didn't move. She only whispered something too soft to catch. Her lips were faintly moving, but the sound didn't come out right. It came out like something brushing through a bad radio frequency. I paused, nodded like an idiot, and kept walking without understanding why. I should have felt fear, confusion, something human, but I felt nothing. Maybe the woods wanted me calm. The next day, she was there again. Same rock, same whisper. This time I forced myself to speak. I said hello in a shaky voice, hoping she wouldn't vanish or scream or tell me to leave. She turned her head slowly, so slowly it made my skin crawl. Her eyes locked onto mine and a strange chill ran through me. "You are not from these hills," she said, her voice soft but strained, like it had to push through thick static. I told her I was visiting family for the summer, said I liked walking in the woods to kill time. "Stay on the ridge path," she murmured. "Do not step where the ground sinks." I asked her name. She didn't give one. She just stared like she was listening to something far behind me. I started calling her Lark, just something my mind picked because she felt like a voice carried by wind. She didn't correct me, didn't react, so I kept using it. When I told Milo about her, his whole face changed. He got pale, tense, and asked 100 questions at once. "Where did you see her? What rock? What clearing? What way did you walk?" When I pointed toward the direction, he shook his head hard. There are no cabins out that way, no families, no girls, he said. Not anymore. He told me to stay out of the woods, said some routes run into places that wake things that shouldn't be woken. His voice trembled a little, and I didn't know Milo to ever be scared. I didn't listen. One evening I went deeper than I ever had, pushing past broken branches, ignoring the cold spots that made the hair on my arms rise. I walked past the ridge like I wasn't warned, my boots sinking slightly as I moved into a dip in the land. That was when I found it, a clearing that felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Stones were set in a large circle, placed carefully by someone or something with intent. In the middle stood a dead tree, its trunk white like bone, stripped of bark and hollowed out like something drank all its life. The air stung my lungs in that place. Lark was standing by the tree, not sitting anymore. Her long dress was torn, her hair messier, her skin pale like she hadn't seen sunlight in years. "You were not meant to come here," she said, but this time her voice was deeper, not just low but layered, like something else was speaking behind her words. My chest tightened, and the small bit of bravery I had cracked. I asked her what this place was, asked why the stones formed a circle, asked why she followed the same spot every day. She stared at me, eyes hollowed and tired, then spoke with a strange, rattling tone. "They believe you belong to me now." The forest went dead silent. No birds, no insects, nothing moved. I felt my heartbeat thudding in my ears like it was trying to escape. When I turned to run, I heard it. Footsteps behind me, quick, soft, not heavy but fast, too fast for any human barefoot in the woods. I didn't dare look back. I sprinted through the trees, branches cutting my arms, boots slipping on soft earth. Every time I stumbled, the footsteps got closer. Something brushed the back of my shirt at one point. I almost fell but pushed myself forward, lungs burning, legs shaking, sweat pouring down my face. I burst out of the tree line and into the yard of the cabin, gasping, knees weak. I ran straight for the porch and collapsed against the wooden steps. The woods behind me were quiet, but I felt watched. I felt something right at the edge of the trees, hiding in the shadows, waiting. My skin crawled like ants moved across my spine. Milo found me shaking, covered in dirt, out of breath. When I told him what happened, he didn't ask questions, didn't try to argue. He just locked every door, shut every window, and pushed heavy furniture against the front entrance. "She followed you," he whispered, his voice barely steady. I didn't want to ask how he knew. The fear in his eyes was enough. That night, I barely slept. Something paced outside the house, circling slowly, like it was dragging its feet or hands across the walls. There was scratching on the right window, then tapping near the back door. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough to remind me it knew I was inside. Every sound made my heart jump. At one point, just after 2:30 a.m., I heard my name whispered softly from the porch, said with a voice that carried broken static, stretched wrong. It wasn't Milo. It wasn't my uncle. It wasn't my uncle. It was something else. By morning, my uncle had already packed the truck. He didn't speak much, didn't ask what happened, just told me to get in and handed me a bag filled with food and water. He said the woods take what they want, and the older mountains remember everything that dies on them. He warned me not to say the girl's name again, not even in a dream. He drove me to the nearest bus stop, a lonely sign near an abandoned gas station. Before I slammed the door shut, he said something that made my stomach drop. "If you ever hear footsteps behind you and the ground feels soft, do not turn around, just keep walking." For months after leaving Crooked Valley, I had dreams of that clearing, of the dead white tree, of Lark's strange eyes and that layered voice calling me hers. I tried to forget. I deleted the small sketches I made of the woods, burned them in a metal trash can behind my house. I stopped talking about the trip, stopped bringing up the mountains, stopped thinking about the strange path through the bushes. I thought leaving would end everything. I was wrong. Some nights, usually around 2:20 or 2:30 a.m., I hear soft tapping on my window, not loud, just a dead rhythm. Other nights, I see a shade near the tree line across the street, a dark figure standing still with hair falling over its shoulders. My heart always races. My hands always shake. I know what I saw was real. I know the mountains don't forget. And sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I swear I hear her whisper my name through static, telling me the same thing she said before. They believe you belong to me now. I try to pretend I don't hear it. I keep the lights on. I try not to look outside. But the dreams haven't stopped, and the strange soft footsteps follow me sometimes when I walk down empty streets. They never get close, never touch me, but they always stay behind me, just out of sight, just far enough that I can't prove anything. Sometimes the ground feels softer under my feet, like it's sinking just a little, like a warning. I know I didn't escape those woods completely. Something followed me back from Crooked Valley, something old and patient. I don't know what it wants or why it chose me, but I feel it every time the wind stops moving and the night turns too quiet. The worst part is the silence before the whisper, the way my skin prickles and the air gets thinner. That's when I know she is close. My name is Marcus, and none of this was supposed to happen. Back then, after my father retired from a small-town community college, he bought a huge timber lodge tucked into the rugged slopes of the Appalachian backcountry. It was wedged so deep into the hills that the gravel road looked like a dried creek someone tried to tame. The place had old beams, iron fixtures, long hallways, and rooms that felt too shadowed even in daylight, but he called it peaceful. I knew better the moment I stepped out of the truck. I felt watched, like something was waiting for us behind the tree line, holding its breath. I was 16. My younger brother, who everyone called Leo, was 6. He had severe developmental delays. He didn't speak, rarely walked without help, and needed constant care. Mom had caretakers coming and going, the house becoming a place of footsteps, wheelchairs, and soft voices trying to help Leo talk or stand. But the lodge didn't take well to strangers. Or maybe strangers didn't take well to it. The first caretaker stayed 2 weeks, left a short note saying the woods felt too quiet, like they were listening. The second caretaker lasted 2 nights. She was strong, strict, always calm, but when she left, she didn't ask for money. She only muttered that something whispered at the windows at night, something hollow. The third caretaker didn't even unpack. She walked through the hallway, paused near the basement, stared at the small wooden door beside the stairs, and left without explaining. Dad told us later that something strange happened during his second night there, before any of us arrived. Just after sunset, someone knocked on the front door. No engine, no headlights, just walking footsteps on brittle leaves. A tall man in heavy boots and a worn canvas coat. He said he worked with the Forest Service and asked if Dad had opened the back storage room in the basement. Dad said he hadn't. The man nodded once, slow, like he already knew the answer. He told him to keep the door shut, then walked straight into the trees, not even bothering with the road. Dad didn't sleep after that, but he stayed anyway. Maybe he was too proud to admit something felt wrong. By the time we moved in, the house had changed, not visibly, but the air had this weight, like an invisible hand pushing against your chest. The nights were the worst. The woods didn't just get quiet. They went dead. No crickets. No owls. No wind. Like the mountain itself held its breath. Then the dreams started. Mom woke us one night screaming. I remember the sound because it didn't even sound human. Dad and I rushed in, found her pressed hard against the headboard, her hands shaking as she pointed at the window. She said something too tall and too thin had been standing outside, pressing its flat palms against the glass, its head tilted like it was studying her. She said she was awake when she saw it, awake when its long fingers scraped the pane like it was trying to feel its way inside. She never slept in that room again. She moved to the guest room, but the thing came back the next night. It didn't matter if the lights were on or off, or if the curtains were open or closed. Only when she locked both doors leading to her room with old iron keys did it stop. The heavy clicks echoed down the hallway every night. Dad started locking his door too, though he never said why. He kept an old hatchet under his bed, even slept with his hand resting near the handle. When I asked if he'd ever seen what Mom saw, he paused for a long time, then nodded once. Only once, he said. That was enough. My aunt came a month later to recover from surgery. She took the guest room beside the basement stairs. On her fourth night, she screamed so loud you'd think someone was hurting her. We found her curled up in the farthest corner of the room, shaking uncontrollably, clutching a blanket like a lifeline. She said she'd woken to see something standing above her, its stretched face hovering inches from hers, like it was trying to drink the air from her mouth. She left before sunrise and blocked us afterward. Nobody ever talked to her again. I left for college soon after, carried the weight of that house with me everywhere I went. I didn't talk about it, not to friends, not to girlfriends, not to anyone. Years passed. Life kept moving. I convinced myself it wasn't real, but the mountains don't forget you. A few years ago, my wife and I took a road trip. We passed near the old area, and against every instinct I had, I asked if she wanted to see where I grew up. She agreed, smiling, not knowing what waited up those old roads. The house looked almost cheerful when we arrived. New owners were repainting the porch. They were friendly, bright, like nothing bad had ever touched that land. Inside, everything was different. Modern lights, fresh paint, open rooms that didn't feel heavy. But I felt the eyes of the woods watching through the glass. I asked about the attic crawl space near the back of the house. The wife frowned and said there wasn't one. I explained where it was. She got quiet, said they sealed it up years ago, boarded over it and pretended it wasn't there. When we left, I walked around the outside alone. I found the old sag in the roofline right where the crawl space had been, tapped on the wall, and felt the hollow echo behind the boards. That room was still there. Whatever lived inside it was still there too, buried, but not gone. I tried to forget. I couldn't. Later that year, Dad finally admitted something he'd kept silent for years. It wasn't just Mom or my aunt or the caretakers. He said Leo used to point at the basement door and laugh. Not a happy laugh, but a strange, breathy sound he rarely made. He said Leo would reach toward the crack at the bottom, as if someone behind it was holding out something only he could see. Dad said the Forest Service man came back once. No warning, no reason. Just stepped out of the woods at dusk and asked if Dad had opened the back storage room yet. Dad said no. Good, the man whispered. Then he said something worse. If you ever hear knocking from inside it, do not answer. Dad said he never locked a basement door so fast in his life. Things got worse around the time I left for school. Mom said she heard footsteps pacing outside her window around 2:17 a.m. every night. Slow, dragging steps. She stopped sleeping altogether. One night, Dad heard Leo's bedroom door creak open even though Leo couldn't open doors on his own. Dad ran down the hall and found the door wide open, the curtains moving even though no windows were open. Leo sat on the edge of his bed, smiling softly at the dark corner like something was entertaining him. That was the night Dad decided they needed cameras, but the cameras never worked in the hallway. The screens went static every time they tried. I didn't know any of this until years later. The last night I ever stepped foot in that house was when Mom called me crying. She said Dad was missing. She said the front door was wide open and the woods sounded wrong. I drove 3 hours without blinking. When I got there, she was on the porch, rocking back and forth, clutching Leo like he'd vanish if she let go. We searched the house. We searched the woods. Hours passed. Then we heard knocking, not from the front door, from the basement door. Soft, slow, 3 taps. Then a pause, then 3 taps again. Mom begged me not to touch it. She said Dad wouldn't knock from the basement. I believed her. Everything in me screamed to leave it alone, but I stepped closer anyway. I pressed my ear to the wood, breathing. Ragged, wet. Something whispered my name, not Dad's voice. Not human. I backed away fast, grabbed my mom and Leo, and we ran to the car. We drove until the mountains disappeared behind the trees. We called the police, but they never found Dad. He was gone, just gone. Years passed. I built a life far away, but the house never sold again. Every time I checked online, it still sat there. No new updates. No new photos. No new owners. Sometimes I search the address just to see if the place vanished. It never does. It just stays, like something inside is waiting, watching. Some nights, I wake up with the same tightness in my chest I felt back then. I get out of bed, lock every door in the house, walk through every room twice. I stand near the windows and listen, wondering if I'll hear the crunch of leaves, wondering if the thing from those mountains ever left that crawl space, or if it followed me when I drove away. And sometimes, right around 2:43 a.m., I swear I hear 3 slow knocks inside the walls. I was 29 when it happened, working a job that most people thought sounded peaceful but was anything but. I used to do remote mountain surveying, not the fancy kind with teams and gear trucks, but the lonely kind where they drop you off with a pack, a radio, and a long list of ridges to document. I had been doing this work for about 5 years, drifting from contract to contract because I liked the silence of wild places, and I never stayed long anywhere else. I grew up in a small river town in Virginia, raised by an uncle who worked long hours and said a quiet life was the safest kind. But I learned young that quiet doesn't always mean safe. Sometimes quiet means something is listening. Back then, I did not know how much that lesson mattered. Back then, I still believed the mountains were my escape, not the thing I should fear. The contract that ruined everything was a 10-day assignment in the northern edge of the Appalachian Plateau, not far from a fading coal settlement called Red Ash Hollow. The place sat low between 2 ridges and looked like the earth had forgotten to swallow it. The roads curled around it like they were scared to pass through. Folks said the whole area had been emptying out for decades, buildings sagging into the dirt, street signs leaning like tired men. They sent me there because it was cheap housing and close to the trail system I had to map. My cabin was nothing more than an old Ranger bunkhouse that smelled like damp cedar, a single room with a cot and a steel stove that groaned every time I tried to light it. The generator sat out back under a sagging lean-to, coughing every time I pulled the cord. No phone reception, no internet, no radio buzz, just thick Appalachian silence that pressed in on you once the sun dropped behind the ridge. I thought I liked quiet, but the quiet in Red Ash Hollow felt like something was swallowing the noise before it could reach me. Even the creek behind the cabin sounded muffled, like it ran under thick blankets. The first 2 days felt normal enough. I hiked the ridges, logged erosion markers, checked on old mining cutouts where the ground sometimes shifted without warning. I saw deer, a fox, a few buzzards circling slow above the tree line. The forests were dense here, trees packed close like worried neighbors leaning in. During the day, the woods were soft and strange but not frightening. At night, though, everything changed. By the second night, I noticed how wrong the darkness felt. The forest went dead silent after sunset, not a single cricket, not a single owl, nothing. I sat outside on the porch eating a cold can of beans, and the only sound I heard was the distant knock of something falling from a high branch, echoing too far through the trees. The air felt heavy, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. On the third night, the first strange thing happened. I was studying my topo map inside, tracing elevation lines with my finger, when I heard footsteps on the leaves outside the cabin. Slow, steady, crunching like someone walking barefoot on dry ground. I froze. The steps came up the little hill toward the porch, paused, then started again, only 1 or 2, then stopped completely. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside, and swept the beam across the yard. Nothing, just trees standing too still, their branches hanging like tired arms. In the morning, I found prints in the dirt along the cabin wall, bare footprints, human-sized, but the shape was wrong. The toes stuck out at odd angles, like whoever made them didn't understand how feet were supposed to bend. Some prints were spaced impossibly far apart, as if the person had leapt 12 or 13 feet between steps. I measured them twice, telling myself the dirt must have dragged weird, but the pattern was clear. I wrote it down in my survey log under unusual ground markings, took pictures, and tried to push the thought away. You learn not to panic in the mountains. Panic only makes the woods feel bigger. Still, something in me stayed tight, like a pulled wire humming under the floor. That afternoon, while marking a cluster of old oak trees, my compass started spinning, not twitching. Spinning like a small motor was turning it. I pulled it away from my pack. Still spinning. I set it on a rock. Still spinning. I stared at it, unable to understand how the needle could move like that without something inside the earth twisting under me. A strange feeling crawled along my spine, the feeling you get when someone watches you from behind a door. I looked around the trees slowly. Nothing. Nothing but leaves and bark and still air. But the feeling stayed with me all the way back to the cabin. That night, I locked the door. I rarely lock doors in the wilderness, but the way the compass twirled made me feel like the mountain itself didn't want me there. Around 7, the generator shut off. No warning. Just dead. I went outside with my flashlight and checked everything. Fuel line fine, filters clear, wires intact, nothing wrong. Except the whole machine felt cold, like it hadn't been running for days. Inside, the air felt heavier. The shadows felt thicker. I made myself walk to the window. That was when I heard it, a whisper, soft as someone exhaling into my ear. My name, but not my name the way people usually said it. It was slow, dragging, like the voice had been asleep for years and was learning how to speak again. Rowan. I jerked back so fast I knocked over my cup. I spun around, expecting someone behind me. But the whisper came again, from the window this time. Rowan. I turned toward the glass, lifting my flashlight. The reflection caught something tall leaning close, its shoulders stretched too wide, its fingers resting on the pane, long and bent backward like broken branches. I couldn't see a face, only an outline, but the voice that drifted through the glass was the part that froze me. It sounded like my mother. My mother had been gone for 8 years. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, holding my knife and the emergency radio like they were charms against something I didn't understand. I kept telling myself it was stress, or mountain hallucinations, or maybe carbon monoxide from the stove. But the part of me that grew up listening to old mountain tales knew better. The mountains speak when they want to, my uncle used to say, but you should never speak back. In the morning, the generator was working again, as if nothing had happened. The air felt normal. The trees looked normal. But something inside me had shifted, and I knew I needed to get out. I called base, told them I might be developing early exposure symptoms, dizziness, disorientation, things that usually get you pulled out early. They told me they would send someone by late afternoon the next day. I counted the hours like a prisoner scratching marks on a wall. That night, the voices came again, but not from outside this time. They came from the walls, soft at first, then growing, pressing in from all sides. First, my mother's voice again, then my uncle's, then a friend I had not spoken to in years. Then a voice that sounded like me, only empty, like someone had hollowed my words out and put new ones inside. They all said the same thing. "Open the door, Rowan." I covered my ears. The walls began to bend inward, not metaphorically, but actually bending, the wood flexing in and out like a chest breathing. The cabin seemed to inhale and exhale with each whisper. My chest tightened until it felt like a fist squeezing my ribs. I grabbed my pack, threw open the door, and ran into the night. The forest should have been dark. It was dead night. But the trees glowed faintly, as if fog held pale light inside it. A dull, pulsing shimmer spread through the woods, and for a moment, I thought maybe it would lead me out. I followed it, but the deeper I walked, the more the forest twisted. I passed the same crooked log 3 times, the same forked branch 4 times. The woods felt alive, shifting behind me, redirecting me, folding in every path I tried to take. Then, ahead of me in the glow, I saw it. Something kneeling beside a tree, wearing my jacket, wearing my backpack. Its head lifted slow, too slow, and I saw my own face stare back. My own eyes, my own mouth, my own mouth. But the smile on it stretched too wide, the skin around the cheeks pulled thin like wet paper ready to tear. When it rose, the knees bent backward like the hinges of a broken puppet. It spoke my name in a flat voice, dead and cold. Rowan. I ran, I don't know how long. The forest blurred into streaks. The ground felt like it was tilting. I stumbled, hit the dirt, crawled until my arms shook. The last thing I remember was curling under a fallen log as the sky began to brighten, whispering please over and over. Headlights burned into my eyes. A ranger truck. 2 men wrapping me in blankets, talking fast, asking what happened. I told them I got lost. That I panicked. Maybe I hit my head. Easier than the truth. They logged it as disorientation and minor trauma. I never went back to mountain work. I cannot even sleep with a window open now because sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear leaves crunching outside my house, slow and careful, like something barefoot is finding its way back to me. I had always believed the mountains were the only place that never lied to me. Out in the open stretches of ridgelines and hollers, where the land dipped like old scars beneath the sky, I could breathe in a way I never could anywhere else. The rest of my life felt cramped, boxed in by the noise of machines and responsibilities and people who spoke around the truth instead of through it. But the mountains, those old, tired bones of the Appalachians, they were honest. They showed you what they were, whether you liked it or not. Back then, I was working 6-day weeks in a fabrication shop outside Columbus. I told myself I was doing fine, but anyone who saw me could tell I was carrying something heavy. Something I didn't want to look at directly. It wasn't one big event. Just a long collection of small disappointments, the kind that pile up until they start shaping your ribs from the inside out. Dad passing too young. My last partner leaving without bothering with a conversation, losing a promotion to someone who used to ask me how to set up their own machine. I felt like I'd spent too many years being quiet about things that were hurting me, and eventually, something inside me whispered that I needed out of the town, out of the routine, out of myself. That's how I ended up planning a solo trip into the Appalachians in late October. Everyone else said I was choosing the wrong season, but that was the whole point. I wanted cold, empty trails. I wanted that feeling of walking into a world that didn't care who I was. I didn't want comfort. I wanted honesty. I picked a region I'd never been to, far off the usual tourist trails. Somewhere the maps only labeled with forest codes and old logging markers. The locals on the small town forum I checked kept saying the same thing about the Bald Spur Range. Don't wander past the marked fire roads. Don't go near the ravine after sundown. If you hear someone calling your name, keep walking. I thought it was superstition. Hell, I even laughed at it. Maybe that was my mistake. The drive took most of the day. I kept the windows cracked even in the cold, just to feel the air change as the land shifted. The hills got higher, the trees older, and the gas stations fewer. When I finally reached the pull-off where I planned to start my hike, dusk was already pooling in the treetops. There was no proper trailhead, just an old metal gate half swallowed by weeds and a battered sign with writing too faded to read. A guy in a rust-red pickup rolled past, slowed down, and leaned over his open window. "Man, you're heading up there alone?" His accent was thick mountain Appalachian, slow, heavy, and almost musical. "Yeah," I said. "Just a couple days." He stared at me a little too long. Not angry, not judging, just measuring. "That ridge don't like strangers much anymore," he said. Then, he tipped his head like he'd said all he needed to, let his truck idle another few seconds, and drove off. I shrugged it off. People love telling stories in places like this. I'd grown up with the same habits. I hoisted my pack, stepped over the gate, and headed for the tree line. The first day felt like medicine. The trail, if you could call it that, wrapped itself in steep climbs and narrow passes. Fallen leaves muffled my steps, and cold wind combed through the red and gold canopy overhead. Every now and then I'd spot an old metal survey marker nailed into a tree, rusted so deep it looked like it had grown there. By late afternoon, I reached a ridgeline with a broken overlooked view of the valley below. The hills looked endless, layered like waves frozen mid-crest. I set up camp among a cluster of spruce, boiled a pouch of chili, and stretched out in my sleeping bag with a kind of exhausted peace I hadn't felt in years. I fell asleep to the sound of wind pushing through branches, no voices, no cars, no memories trying to shove their way into my head. Just silence that felt earned. The second morning was when things shifted. I woke before sunrise, not because of a sound, but because something felt wrong, a pressure in the air. A heaviness, like the moment before a deer bolts when you know without knowing that something else is there. I stepped out of the tent and the cold hit me like a slap, but there was something else in the air too. A smell, metallic, faintly rotten, with a sweetness underneath it that made my stomach fold in on itself. It wasn't from my food, it wasn't from the earth. It was something older. The forest was dead quiet. No birds, no bugs, not even the soft crack of branches settling, just stillness. I tried to shake it off. Plenty of mornings in the woods were quiet. The smell? Maybe a dead animal nearby. But even thinking that, I didn't believe myself. I packed up and moved fast. Too fast. Like I thought something might reach out and grab the back of my shirt if I stayed too long. By midday, I found something strange. It was a clearing, but not the kind made by storms or fallen trees. The grass there had grown in flattened rings, like giant hands had pressed down on it years ago, and the land never recovered its shape. There were stones arranged in a rough oval, old, moss-choked, half-buried. And the trees surrounding it were burned black at their bases, the scorch march crawling upward in jagged lines. But there was no sign of a fire ever having touched the canopy. It was all wrong, I muttered to myself, trying to steady the anxiety that had started creeping in. All right, probably some old burn test site. To be anything, keep moving. I skirted the clearing and didn't look back. I planned to camp on the east slope that night, but I ended up farther north than expected. The sky was already dark by the time I found a flattish patch between two large boulders. I didn't waste time cooking, just ate a protein bar and crawled into the tent. For a while, I listened to the forest outside, trying to convince myself it was normal, that the silence earlier had been in my head. Around, hell, I don't even know the time, maybe somewhere around 1:40, I snapped awake. Not from a sound. From absence of sound. No wind. No forest, no breathing. Not even my own at first. I sat up slowly, every hair on my arm standing up. Something cracked outside. A twig snapped. Another, slow, deliberate. Footsteps. Someone or something was walking around my camp. My mouth went dry. I reached for the knife I kept beside my sleeping bag, but my hand shook so badly I dropped it once before gripping it tight. The footsteps circled, paused, started again. Right outside the tent. I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. Then something shifted between two trees, maybe 30 feet away. A tall shape. Too tall. Too tall. Its silhouette stretched wrong, like it had extra joints where there shouldn't be. Its arms hung low, almost brushing the ground. Its head leaned to the side as if it wasn't used to holding it upright. I froze. Then it spoke, using my father's voice. "Son, come here a second." The words came out warped, like they'd been dragged through mud before reaching me. My father had been dead for 6 years. I didn't move. The shape took one slow, unnatural step forward. "You hear me, boy? Come on over now." Something snapped inside me, some deep instinct that screamed, "Don't listen." I pressed my back against the far wall of the tent, gripping the knife so hard my knuckles ached. The thing stood there for what felt like hours. Just waiting, head cocked like it was studying me. Then, without warning, it turned sharply, limbs cracking like dry branches, and walked back into the dark, each step growing softer until it vanished entirely. I didn't move until the sun started bleeding into the sky. I didn't bother packing the tent. I grabbed what I could and ran. Branches tore at my arms. Rocks scraped my legs. I didn't care. I just ran, pulse pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through my ribs. I didn't even check the GPS. I trusted only one direction away. Near mid-morning, I stumbled onto something that looked like salvation. An old stone building, maybe a ranger station or a fire watch cabin, sat crooked against the hillside. The windows were boarded. The door hung slightly off its hinge, but it was real, man-made. That was enough. I slammed my palm against the wood. "Hello? Anyone in there?" Please. Hey, I need help. Something's out here. The door opened a crack, and a man's face appeared. He was older, wiry, with deep-set eyes that had seen far too many winters in the mountains. He didn't look surprised to see me, not at all. He opened the door fully and stepped aside. Get in. Quick now. I stumbled inside. He shut the door and slid a steel bar across it. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then he said, "You went off the posted roads, didn't you?" I nodded, panting, shaking, sweat freezing on my skin. His jaw tensed. That's a damn shame. What was that thing? I asked. It talked. It knew my dad's voice. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to a small stove in the corner, poured water into an old kettle, and set it on the burner. "You hear stories up here," he said quietly. "Things wearing voices they ain't earned. Things that wander near places folks were smart enough to leave alone." He turned to me. "Ridges remember the old things better than people do." My throat tightened. "So what do I do?" He looked away. "You leave, and don't bring the memory of it back with you. That's all you can do." I left the cabin 15 minutes later. He didn't try to stop me, didn't tell me where exactly town was. Just pointed downhill and said, "Keep going till you find the road. Don't stop for anything that sounds familiar." I walked. Hours. Maybe the whole day. I didn't hear the thing again, but several times I thought I heard footsteps just behind the tree line. Each time, I kept walking faster. By dusk, I reached asphalt. Civilization, safety, I thought. But even now, years later, I'm not sure I ever really came back down that ridge. Sometimes, late at night, when the air is dead still, I swear I hear my father's voice outside my window. "Son, you awake?" My name is Jack Hart, and before all of this, I worked as a maintenance tech for a small college in northern Ohio, fixing leaky pipes, unclogging dorm showers, and pretending I didn't hear the strange noises coming from students' rooms after midnight. Nothing special, nothing heroic, nothing worth remembering. I had already drifted through a rough breakup, the kind that doesn't explode but leaks slowly, leaving colorless stains you keep noticing in odd moments. My relationship ended on a cold Wednesday afternoon, somewhere around 2:51 p.m., when my partner said we were no longer heading in the same direction, and I just nodded because I was too tired to argue. My job wore me down by noon every day, and I carried a strange, hollow feeling in my chest that no sleep could fix. Life felt noisy, crowded, and messy in ways that didn't make sense. I didn't want to vanish forever. I only needed quiet, real quiet, the kind that sinks into your bones and stops the buzzing in your skull. I told myself I would take a break, disappear for a little while. Nothing dramatic, no planned escape, no big meltdown, just space. Just breath, just time without phones or people or voices. I wanted something older than my worries, something wide enough to swallow them whole. That was how I ended up heading south toward the Appalachian edges of Kentucky, near a forgotten stretch of forest people called Widow's Vein Ridge. I didn't know the name until later. On the map, it was only a pale smear of green tucked between two old mining roads. I wasn't looking for the kind of trails people post online, not the pretty overlooks or the sunny fields or the family-friendly signs nailed to fences. I drove through the mountains with no music, following roads that bent like cracked fingers, until I reached a dirt pull-off with a leaning wooden post that had no words left on it. I packed light, maybe too light. A beat-up tent, a pocket knife, a week of dried meals, a metal canteen, and a second-hand copy of a book about animals escaping danger. The cover was torn, and the pages smelled like dust and strangers, but it had been with me through lonely nights when I needed something to keep my mind anchored. I shut my phone off because there was no service anyway, folded the map in half, and clipped a cheap compass to the strap of my pack. I barely remembered how to use either, but that felt like the point. I wanted to feel lost enough that the noise inside me finally faded. The first day felt like stepping into a world that didn't care about me, and I liked that. The forest was quiet in a dense way, not empty but full of breathing life. My boots pressed into soft dirt, my breath puffed in little clouds, and the trees lifted above me like tall watchers, old and patient. I felt simple again, like maybe everything in my head could drain out through the soles of my feet. That night, I set my tent beside a narrow stream that rushed fast enough to drown out my thoughts. The water's voice was constant and wild, like static in a faraway storm. I ate cold rice with dried strips of meat, sitting on a log while the trees moved in slow sways like worn-down figures muttering secrets to each other. The place felt untouched, not just old but ancient, like I had stepped through a thin crack into a forest that belonged to no one alive. I fell asleep listening to the rush of water. That was when the first dream came. In it, I stood barefoot outside my tent, cold dirt under my feet, staring into the thick woods. There was no wind, no chirping insects, no small rustling animals. Only breath, heavy, wrong. Something out there was watching me. I couldn't see it, but I felt its eyes pressing against my skin the way cold metal presses into your palm. I couldn't move, not because I was scared, but because something held me still, like invisible hands gripping my bones. Just before that thing stepped forward, I snapped awake with my heart pounding. I blame nerves. People camp alone all the time. Dreams do strange things in big, quiet places. I tried to shake it off. The second night, the dream returned. Exactly the same. Same spot, same breath. Same darkness pressing against me. I woke just before seeing the shape that waited in the shadows. By the third night, dread crawled into me long before dusk. I stayed up late, reading by flashlight until my eyes stung, trying to keep the darkness away, but the dream found me anyway. It came like a hand reaching through black water, pulling me under. By the fourth night, I didn't bother lighting a fire. Something in my gut whispered that the flame was a signal, a bright wound in the dark telling something exactly where I was. My hands trembled without explanation as I tightened the tent zipper. I barely slept. When morning came, something about my campsite shifted. My fire pit, untouched the day before, had changed. The stones were not toppled or scattered by animals, but stacked into a small pyramid. Perfect, intentional, and human, or something pretending to be human. I stared at it barefoot on the damp ground. My breath fogged the air. My mind tried to offer excuses, but my body already knew the truth I didn't want to admit. The next morning, the stones were rearranged again, this time in a ring. A circle so perfect it looked carved. The day after that, they formed a bent shape, 4 straight lines curling in a hooked pattern at the bottom. A symbol, maybe old or maybe new, but not anything I wanted to understand. I felt watched, even in daylight, like something stood behind my shoulder just out of view. I packed slowly that afternoon, trying to plan my way out. When I checked the map, nothing made sense. Trails I thought I followed were gone. Clearings I passed were missing. Every direction looked the same, like a repeating painting. The forest pressed close as if trying to fold me into itself. I told myself I would leave tomorrow. That night, it whispered. Not in a dream. In my tent. 2 faint words slipped beside my ear, barely breath at all, but they sank through me like ice. Do you remember? I froze. My lungs locked. The air held weight, heavy and warm and present. Something stood on the other side of the tent fabric. Or maybe inside the space with me. I could feel its breath, slow and steady, like it had all the time in the world. I stayed still until my muscles ached and sweat soaked my shirt. When I finally moved, the whisper was gone, but the air still felt bruised. At dawn, I found something hanging from a low cedar branch about 8 feet from my tent. A figure made of thin sticks bound together with stretched hide, pale and tight and too thin to be deerskin. The figure had a hollow chest where a smooth, black stone rested, slick with something that smelled faintly metallic. Copper, but not copper. More like old blood left in a warm room. I gagged before I realized it and stumbled back, falling into the mud. Panic tore through me. I packed everything in minutes, shoving gear into my bag with shaking hands. I ran, not caring where the path led. My breath burned in my throat. My legs hurt. My mind screamed with a fear that felt too big to belong to any normal danger. Every trail twisted back onto itself. every ridge repeated. Every stream sounded like the same rushing water I heard the first night. The woods wanted me lost. That night, I didn't set up the tent. I found a stone wall, some old ruin or maybe a collapsed mine entrance, and pressed my back against it with my knife gripped tight. Sleep stayed far away. My eyes burned from staying open too long, but fear kept them from closing. That was when I saw it. It stepped from the trees without sound. Tall, thin. Wrong. Its limbs moved with broken intent, like they had been borrowed from something no longer alive. Its face was covered in pale stretched skin, almost human in outline, but wrong in all the places that matter. Its eyes were too far apart. Its mouth was a long slit without shape, no ears. No hair, no hint of anything human except the suggestion of where a face should be. It did not walk, it slid, like smoke passing through something solid. It stopped just outside the edge of my flashlight beam. Its stillness was the worst part. It watched me, and in that moment, I understood something I wish I didn't. It didn't want my body, it wanted something deeper. Something inside me, something I didn't have a name for. It vanished between one blink and the next, gone like a missing frame in a film reel. I sat there until sunlight touched the treetops, knife locked in my hand. When morning came, a path appeared. Narrow, overgrown, but there, clear as bone against the ground. I knew it had not been there before. I followed without thought, without choice. Hours passed as I walked. My legs moved on their own. I did not eat or drink. The forest fell behind me like a closing mouth. Eventually, I stepped onto a gravel road and I dropped to my knees when I heard the distant hum of a truck engine. When the old rusted pickup turned the bend, I cried. A couple in their 60s sat inside, staring with wide eyes. They didn't ask any questions. They only opened the door. I stepped in, shaking so badly my teeth clicked. I barely remember the drive back to town. Weeks later, in my apartment far away from the ridge, I convinced myself it had been a breakdown. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe I stumbled into something from old mountain rituals people whispered about. Maybe my mind cracked and stitched nightmares into waking reality. Those lies helped me sleep. Until the package came. A plain brown envelope sat on my doorstep. No name, no return address. Inside was another stick figure, bound in the same pale hide, holding the same black stone. But this one had something new around its neck, a thin nylon cord with a snapped piece of black plastic tied to it. It was a fragment of my flashlight, the one I dropped the night I watched it stand at the edge of the light. I moved again, changed my name on every record I could, burned the figure and threw the ashes into a deep river while my hands shook. Sometimes, late at night around 2:38 a.m., I hear something scrape lightly against my window. Not enough to be wind, not enough to be branches, just enough to feel like breath on glass. And sometimes I swear I hear it ask again, low and patient, "Do you remember?" I always thought the forest couldn't lie. The way it breathed, the way it swallowed light, it felt ancient but honest, like it had nothing left to prove. I was wrong. Back then, my name was Mark Weaver, a 22-year-old geology student trying to make something of himself. I'd grown up in a town where the mountains pressed in on all sides, and every summer the fog came down so thick it turned the world into gray paper. When the university sent out applications for seasonal research assistants, I jumped at the chance. The form said remote terrain preferred candidates welcome. I thought that meant hiking and soil samples, not whatever waited out there. They sent me to a ranger outpost called Station 8, buried deep in the Appalachian backcountry near the Tennessee-Virginia border. It wasn't even on a public map. The van that dropped me off left before I could change my mind. By the time its sound faded down the dirt road, I was standing in front of a cabin older than anything I'd ever seen. The boards were weathered silver, the windows small and crooked, and it sat between two ridges like it had sunk there. The air smelled heavy, moss and wet bark. There were two others stationed with me. Harper, a botany grad from Ohio, had a laugh that could fill a room, but she used it less each week. And Clint, a former Marine turned field tech, quiet and square-jawed, always whittling something with a knife that looked too sharp to be practical. He didn't talk about his past. He didn't have to. You could see it sitting on his shoulders like a pack he couldn't take off. Our days were simple. We tracked weather patterns, recorded soil composition, logged animal sightings. The cabin had no signal, no radio tower, no generator beyond a few hours of power from solar batteries that hardly worked. Nights were lantern light and books. I thought I'd get bored, but the stillness started to crawl under my skin. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, like a blanket pressed over the world. You could yell and hear your echo come back delayed, thinner than it should be, like the forest needed time to think before answering. Harper said it was just acoustics, the way the trees absorb sound. Clint didn't say anything, but I saw him watching the woods at dusk, as if waiting for them to blink. The cabin had a storage annex built off the back. You had to duck to go through the door. The wood didn't match the rest of the structure. It was older, almost black with age. Grain warped and twisted like it had been burned and rebuilt. Inside were old tools, ropes, gas cans, and a smell like stone after rain. The door stuck in the humidity, creaking every time he moved it. Clint refused to go inside. Not once. He'd step around it to grab supplies through the window, but never cross the threshold. When I asked why, he said, low and flat, "Some things keep their own rules out here." Harper laughed and told him ghosts weren't real. Clint didn't argue, but I saw the way his hand tightened around his knife handle. 2 weeks in, I started feeling watched. Not the normal kind. This was deeper, like the woods had eyes and I was the one trespassing. I'd catch shapes between the trees that didn't move right. Sometimes, when I went out to record wind patterns at night, I'd feel air on my neck, cold and slow, like someone exhaling behind me. Harper was the first to mention the footsteps. Said she heard someone pacing behind the cabin after midnight. Heavy, deliberate, circling the walls. Clint went out with his flashlight, but the beam dissolved into fog before it reached the tree line. When he came back, he said it wasn't an animal. We started locking everything. The doors, the shutters, even the cabinets. It didn't help. Some mornings things had shifted boots in different places, maps unrolled, the lantern's flame snuffed out mid-burn. I told myself we were imagining it, but deep down, I already knew better. One night, Harper left to meet a contact down the ridge. She was supposed to be gone 2 days. The morning she left, she joked that she'd bring back real coffee instead of the instant stuff. We never saw her again. That night, it was just me and Clint. He sat at the table carving another one of his small wooden figures. Thin, twisted things that didn't look like animals or people, but something between. The lantern light threw strange shadows over his face. By 10, he went to his bunk. I stayed up writing in my field log, trying to convince myself I wasn't scared. Around midnight, I stepped outside for air. The sky was a low lid of gray. No stars, no sound, no wind. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. When I turned back toward the cabin, I noticed something. The door to the annex was cracked open. I knew I'd latched it earlier. I don't know why I went to check. Habit maybe, or denial. I pushed it shut, heard the metal click, and stood there a second too long, my reflection faint in the old window glass. Inside, I thought I saw something move. But when I blinked, it was gone. I went to bed. The next thing I remember, I wasn't in bed anymore. My feet were on cold stone. The air was wrong, thick, like fog underwater. I could see, but there was no light source. The walls pressed in, not wood anymore, but slick, uneven rock that breathed slow and steady. It was the annex, but not. It had changed. Something moved in the far corner. It was tall, impossibly thin, bending like it had too many joints. Its skin looked like wet bark, gray and cracked, pulsing faintly as if something inside was trying to get out. Where a face should have been was just a stretch of trembling flesh, rippling as if it were breathing. It lifted its arm, longer than human, the elbow bending backward. It pointed at me. The motion was precise, patient, deliberate. Then its hand curled, slow, beckoning me closer. My body wouldn't move, my chest locked up, eyes stinging. It didn't feel like it wanted to attack. It felt like it was claiming something. Me. Then I hit the floor beside my bunk, gasping. My wrist ached where I must have landed. The cabin was dark, Clint's slow breathing steady above. The door to the annex stood wide open. The latch hung loose, swaying back and forth though there was no breeze. I didn't sleep again that night. I waited for dawn and shut the door with a broom handle from across the room. I didn't tell Clint. I couldn't. He wouldn't have been surprised anyway. By morning, his bunk was empty. Knife gone, pack gone, boots gone, no footprints, no sign of where he went. The forest didn't even look disturbed. It was like it had folded him in. I lasted 3 more days, ate canned beans, drank rainwater, stayed awake until my eyes burned. Every creak felt like a whisper. Every flicker of shadow carried shape. The air around the annex stayed colder, heavy with the smell of damp stone. On the last morning, I decided to leave. I packed what I could, kept the journal, and stepped onto the porch. Before I went, I looked back once more. The annex door was closed, but just inside, on the far wall, a dark smear ran down like someone had dragged their hand through soot. 5 streaks, too long to be human. I walked until the forest opened and the road found me. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I just said we got separated during a storm. They nodded, wrote it down, and sent me home. That was 4 years ago. I don't hike anymore. I can't even stand the sound of trees swaying at night. But sometimes, when I wake up just before dawn, I hear it again. The slow creak of an old door opening somewhere in the dark, followed by silence thick enough to choke on. And once, last winter, I found a small wooden figure sitting on my porch. The same kind Clint used to carve. Only this one had no face. Just a smooth, blank surface that seemed to pulse when I stared too long. I left it there. But when I checked the next morning, it was gone. My name's Daniel, and I grew up in a tired valley tucked between the ridges of eastern Kentucky. Folks around there called it Coal Ridge, though no coal had come out of those hills in decades. The air smelled like damp leaves and old iron, and the trees leaned over the dirt road like they were listening. My parents said the move would give us peace, a quiet place to start fresh after Dad's layoff. But nothing about that place ever felt quiet to me. The house was small and crooked, patched together with boards that didn't match. The roof sagged over the porch, and the windows looked out toward the dense green of the Appalachian woods. Behind the yard was a fence that didn't really keep anything out. My father said the land beyond belonged to no one, but people in town called it the Hollow. They said it stretched farther than maps showed, that it looped back on itself when you walked too deep. Some said there were graves out there that no one marked, and sometimes the ground rose at night where it shouldn't. We moved there in late summer when the cicadas screamed loud enough to drown your thoughts. I remember how the sunlight never seemed to touch the back of our property. It just stopped at the fence, like the woods had swallowed the light. It wasn't long before my older brother Miles got drawn to that place. He was 13, quiet but sharp, always sketching, always watching. He had a way of seeing things I missed, things I didn't want to see. When we arrived, he was still himself, still humming songs, still teasing me. But the longer we lived there, the more he changed. He started spending hours in those trees. At first, Mom thought it was healthy, said it gave him time to think. But he would come back scratched, muddy, sometimes barefoot, his jeans torn, his eyes strange and wide. Once, he told me the woods hummed when you stood still long enough. Another time, he said he saw someone standing between the birches, watching him, though there was no one when he turned. The night he came home laughing was the night I started keeping my door locked. It wasn't happy laughter. It was hollow and too long, like something inside him had cracked. He said he'd met someone in the hollow, a man who listened to the hills. I didn't know what that meant, but I could tell he wasn't joking. The man came 2 days later. He called himself Calvin, tall and drawn out, with a face that looked sunken from hunger or sickness. His skin had that pale, stretched look, and his hair fell around his shoulders in clumps. He carried something wrapped in cloth, a curved piece of wood carved with strange marks. When he saw Miles, he smiled in this crooked way that made the air feel too thin. He said he'd been looking for my brother, said he'd heard him humming in the trees and that his tone matched the mountain. My father laughed it off, told him to leave, but Calvin didn't move. He stared past my dad right at Miles and said, "Some things hear better through silence." After that, Miles followed him everywhere. Calvin started showing up in the yard after sunset, whispering to Miles through the fence. One night, I watched them from the window as they drew something on the ground rings, inside rings, made of ash and dirt. Calvin pressed that carved stick into the middle and told Miles to listen. I swear I heard the ground move, like a slow breath under the soil. From then on, Miles stopped sleeping. He'd sit up all night, whispering to the floorboards, his hand pressed flat against them. He said the mountain was teaching him something, that it was showing him shapes. He drew those shapes on the walls, the table, even his own arms. My mother cried every night. My father tried to stop him, but Miles would scream if anyone touched the drawings. I heard him say, "It's not done talking yet." Then came the night they did the ritual. It was late October, cold enough that frost painted the windows. Calvin and Miles went out back carrying candles and that carved stick. I followed at a distance, hiding behind the woodshed. The moon was pale and low, and the trees looked like black ribs rising from the ground. They stood in a circle of salt and ash. Calvin's voice was low, trembling, not like words, but like a hum that shook the air. Miles closed his eyes and raised his hands, and the wind stopped completely. It was so still, I could hear my heartbeat. Then I saw it. Something behind my brother, darker than the dark around him, tall and wide, bending the space it stood in. Miles smiled. Then he screamed, but not from fear. It was the sound of triumph, of something breaking free. The candles blew out. I don't know how long I hid in that shed, but when I came out, the ground was burned in a spiral pattern, and both of them were gone. The woods were silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. By dawn, Miles was back on the porch, barefoot, shivering, holding that carved stick like it was a piece of himself. Calvin was gone. The sheriff searched for him but found nothing. Miles wouldn't speak for days. When he did, his voice was different, lower, rougher. He said one thing before he stopped talking again. He said, "It took the wrong breath." After that, the house changed. The smell of rot crept in from the basement. My father said it was just the pipes, but when he went down there to check, he came back pale and shaking. He wouldn't say what he saw. Miles started sleeping in the basement, even though my parents begged him not to. He said he needed to stay close, that the hollow was calling again. He carved the same spiral symbols into the door and warned us never to open it. Sometimes at night, I'd hear him talking to someone down there. A second voice would whisper back, deep and slow, like it came from the walls. Then came the last night. Mom and Dad left for Hazard to get supplies. I stayed home, too sick to travel. Miles said he was going into the woods for a while, told me not to wait up. He left before sunset. By midnight, the house felt wrong. The air was thick, the floorboards creaked, though no one walked. I heard faint humming from the woods, and the ground seemed to tremble with each note. I hid under the window, clutching a flashlight. When I finally dared to look outside, I saw figures moving between the trees. Dozens of them, all walking in circles around the clearing. Their faces looked wrong, like they were stretched over shapes too big for their bones. In the center stood Miles, his eyes white, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't work. Then, one of the shapes turned toward the house. Its body moved wrong, like it didn't understand how legs should bend. I ran to the basement and locked the door. There was a sound behind the wall, slow and steady, like breathing. The wood pulsed under my hands. I could hear whispers through the floor. They said my name. They said, "You were never supposed to stay." When I woke up, it was morning. The door was open. The spiral marks were gone. Miles never came back. The sheriff found footprints that led into the hollow and stopped halfway through, like he'd stepped off the earth itself. We moved 2 weeks later. My mother never spoke about it again. My father stopped fixing houses and started drinking. As for me, I still wake up at night hearing the mountain breathe. Sometimes, I think I hear humming in the dirt beneath my bed, low and deep, waiting for someone to answer. I've never gone back to Coleridge, never stepped near those woods again. But I know the hollow's still there, waiting for another voice that matches its rhythm. And sometimes, when the wind dies completely, I could swear it's calling mine. I never believed in curses. I never believed in anything I couldn't touch or measure or explain away. But belief doesn't save you when the dark wants your attention. My name's Thomas. Back then, I was 19 and thought I had the world figured out. My parents were splitting apart that spring, and I got sent to stay with my Uncle Roy up in the mountains of Western Virginia, deep along the spine of the Appalachians where the roads twist like old veins and the fog sits heavy on the trees. He had a small cabin near a place called Bitter Hollow, a town you'd miss if you blinked on the highway. There was no signal, no neighbors, just pine, damp air, and the slow hum of insects. Uncle Roy was quiet, a man built out of long silences and old routines. He worked nights running a loader at a lumber yard down in the valley. When he wasn't working, he fished or carved little wooden animals. That weekend, he packed up his tackle box and told me he'd be gone until Sunday night, fishing with a friend over in Tennessee. I told him I'd be fine. I meant it. The first night alone, I sat on the porch with a bottle of root beer sweating beside me and my headphones in. The forest glowed faintly under the moon, and fireflies flickered like dying stars. Then the cricket stopped. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone hit mute on the whole world. I sat up, uneasy, waiting. That's when I heard it. 3 notes whistled through the trees, high, low, high. I paused my music, pulled my headphones off, stared into the black tree line. Nothing. Just stillness thick enough to feel on my skin. I told myself it was a bird, or maybe the wind cutting through a hollow branch. But something in me didn't believe that. When I finally went back inside, I locked the door and checked it twice. Later, brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I heard it again. The same 3 notes, right outside the window. My hand froze midair. I shut off the light and leaned closer to the glass. It was pitch black outside, the kind of black that eats reflections. I waited, listening to my own breathing, the taste of toothpaste thick on my tongue. Then silence. That night, I left the lamp on. I didn't sleep much. Every small sound made me flinch. The house creaked like it was breathing. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Made a heavy breakfast, bacon and eggs greasy enough to fog the window, music loud through the little Bluetooth speaker. I walked the 3 miles into town to clear my head. The road curved through dripping trees, and I swore I could feel eyes on me the whole way. In Bitter Hollow, I stopped at a dusty general store where an old man named Mr. Store. Gable ran the counter. He looked like he'd been carved from the same wood as the store, thin, weathered, and splintered. He asked if I was Roy's nephew. I nodded. Then, half joking, I said, "I think something's been whistling outside the cabin." He stopped stacking cans, just stared at me. "You heard it?" "Yeah, I guess." "Why?" He didn't answer. Just watched me, his jaw tight, then rang me up without another word. The way he looked at me made my stomach knot, like I'd just admitted to something I shouldn't have said out loud. That night, I didn't step outside. Locked the doors, pulled every curtain, tried to distract myself with a movie, something loud and stupid, just noise. Around 2:17 a.m., the lights went out. The TV, the lamp, the fridge, all dead at once. I sat in the dark, heartbeat loud in my chest. Then I heard it again. 3 notes whistled, clear through the dark, from the front yard. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the living room window, pulled the curtain just enough to see out. Something stood at the edge of the gravel path, tall, thin, its limbs too long, its clothes hanging wrong, like they'd been borrowed from someone smaller. Its head was tilted down, listening. It stood there for what felt like hours, motionless. Then it whistled again, but not the same 3 notes. It whistled my tune. The dumb tune I always hummed without thinking while I worked at the auto shop back home. The one no one else could know. My throat closed. It knew me. I stepped back, almost tripping over the coffee table, then bolted upstairs and locked myself in Uncle Roy's room. I sat on the floor, flashlight in one hand, fireplace poker in the other, waiting for the first crack of dawn. When morning finally bled through the curtains, I crept downstairs. The power was back. Everything looked normal except the front door was wide open, and on the window, right where I'd been standing, was a handprint. Muddy, huge. I wiped it off, scrubbing hard until the glass squealed, pretending if I cleaned it, it wouldn't be real. When Uncle Roy came home that evening, I told him everything, every detail. He didn't laugh, didn't even look surprised. "That's why I don't stay out there alone," he said quietly. "Figured it'd leave you be since you weren't from here." Guess I was wrong. That night, I packed my bag, left before sunrise. Years passed. I never went back to Bitter Hollow. I moved south, worked as a mechanic in a small town near the coast, and tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Then one summer, camping with friends near the Smoky Ridge Trail in North Carolina, I woke up to that same silence. The forest around our tents was heavy, thick, listening. At first, I thought it was the wind. But then, soft and clear, came 3 notes. High, low, high. I froze, the same pattern. Then it changed. The next sound was my name, stretched into a whistle that trembled through the fabric of the tent. I didn't wait, woke my friends, told them there was a bear, forced everyone to pack up. We left before the sun even touched the ridge. I've never gone camping again. I live now in a small apartment, above a garage in Florida, far from any woods. I keep a flashlight by the bed. I keep music playing low most nights, just enough to drown out silence. But sometimes, when the air's too still, I swear I hear something faint outside the window. 3 notes, high, low, high. And once, just once, I could have sworn it added a 4th, my name. I used to think I knew every inch of these ridges, every hollow, and every bend that curled through the dark folds of the coal hills. I grew up running through them like veins, breathing the damp rot and pine air so long it felt part of me. But no matter how much ground you cover, the land keeps things from you until it wants to show them. My uncle Raymond owned a ragged stretch of hillside near the old Bishop Hollow mine, about 30 minutes outside a fading town called Cold Mercy, West Virginia. He bought it back in the late 80s when the company pulled out and left the place to rot. I was 9 that first summer. He let me stay there, and I remember thinking it was the best place on earth. My cousins and I would spend whole days tearing along those broken trails, tossing rocks into flooded shafts, daring each other to peek into the mine's mouth where the air came out colder than ice. We'd build fires at night and whisper stories about miners who went missing underground or the sounds that floated out from the cracks when the wind was still. We never believed any of it, not really. It was just something to make our hearts race before we drifted to sleep with ash in our hair. Last September, my uncle called me. His voice was thin, roughened by the stroke that had left one side of his mouth heavy. He asked if I could come for a few days, help clear the main path before winter came down. He sounded like he hated asking. I said yes before he could finish. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was just that kind of restlessness that sneaks in when you've been sitting too long in your own head. I told myself a little hard work might make me feel grounded again. I left before the sun came up that Saturday. The sky had that dull white cast that makes the whole day feel like morning that never ends. A thin wind rolled down the ridge and bit straight through my jacket. I parked by the sagging gate at the base of the dirt road and could see my breath puffing in small clouds as I unloaded my gear. I had an old paint can, a hammer, a bundle of iron stakes, and a roll of that blinding orange marking tape that looks like it hums in your eyes. The job was simple enough. Walk the trail, tag the bad trees, mark what needed to stay standing. It wasn't exciting, but I told myself I liked that. Routine can make you forget how easy it is for things to fall apart. The first part went like it always had. I hiked in, the truck fading behind me, the air getting quieter until it was just the soft crackle of frost breaking under my boots. For a while, it felt right. The kind of silence that sits steady in your chest. I stopped now and then, tapping stakes into the dirt, checking bark for rot. When I reached my fourth marker, though, I slowed down. Something was wrong. The trail didn't look like it should. There should have been a fork up ahead after a big sycamore hollowed near the base, the one that leaned like an old drunk. That fork led to a ridge where you could see the mine pit shimmer green in the sunlight. But when I reached that tree, there was no split. Just one long stretch of trail leading straight ahead. I stood there for a moment, my pack heavy on my shoulders, trying to convince myself I was remembering wrong. I turned a full circle, scanning for anything familiar. A crooked fence post, an old rail tie, a sign half buried in leaves. But it all looked the same. The same trees, the same shadows bending long in the cold light. I kept walking, telling myself the fork must be farther ahead. After maybe 20 minutes, my legs began to ache, and a pressure built in my chest, the kind that doesn't feel like being tired. It feels like the air itself is heavier. I stopped, bent over, and tried to breathe. My pulse thudded against my skull. It was like the trail had stretched out behind me, growing longer with every blink. Then I saw them. I almost stepped into them. They were sunk deep into the damp dirt, clear as anything, right in the middle of the trail. My first thought was bear tracks, but the shape was wrong. I crouched down and felt the edge with my fingers. They were human-wide toes, no sign of shoes, no tread. Just the clean press of bare skin and weight. The prints started out of nowhere, like whoever made them just appeared there and stood still for a while. I pressed my hand beside one. The dirt was still soft, cool, almost wet, like it hadn't been long since something heavy stood there. My stomach turned sour. I tried to think of hikers, campers, kids maybe, but that didn't fit. Nobody came out here anymore. Nobody had for years. That was enough for one day. I turned around, expecting to see the bend leading back toward the truck. But the trail behind me looked different too, like it had rearranged itself when I wasn't looking. Every landmark I tried to fix on this fallen pine, that ridge of stone, seemed to shift and reappear in places that didn't make sense. The longer I walked, the more the woods started to feel like a loop, like I was circling something I couldn't see. I tried to steady my breathing, told myself I'd find my way out before dark. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. Slow, careful, pressing through the brush just off the path. They matched me. Each time I stopped, they stopped too. My skin crawled, and I held my breath, straining to listen. All I could hear was the thud of my own pulse in my ears. I thought maybe I was imagining it. The mind plays tricks when it's quiet too long. I took one step, then another. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound came again, keeping perfect pace. I turned toward the noise, forcing my voice steady. Hey, you out here? You out here? Need help? Nothing. Just wind slithering through the branches. I swallowed, my throat dry, my voice shaking when I called again. You lost? Silence. Silence. Then the faint sound of movement, like fabric brushing against bark. By then, the light was thinning, the air cooling fast. The trees were throwing long, uneven shadows that swayed when I blinked. My hands trembled, and I shoved them into my pockets, pretending I wasn't scared. I kept walking, faster now, watching the ground for the next turn. But the forest wasn't right. The trees looked stretched, the color of the sky bleeding into the leaves until everything was tinted gray-blue. My boots left deep marks in the dirt, and I started counting my steps without realizing it, just something to keep my head straight. Then I turned the corner. He was standing there. Right by the last stake I'd hammered in earlier that day. He looked wrong. His body seemed too long, the limbs off by just enough that my eyes didn't know where to settle. His shoulders drooped, his clothes torn in places, jeans soaked up to the knees, though the ground around him was bone dry. He raised a hand slowly, palm open toward me, and pressed it flat against his chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think of what to say. My whole body locked up like the air had turned to stone. He took one step closer, and I saw the bottoms of his feet black with mud, streaked with something dark that caught the dying light. I told myself it was dirt. Just dirt. He didn't speak. He didn't make a sound at all. We stood like that, the distance between us shrinking and the woods closing in. My chest ached. I could hear the blood in my ears louder than the wind. Then my boot nudged the paint can I dropped earlier. It clattered, the lid flipping off, and a streak of orange spilled across the trail like fire. The man looked down at it, head tilting slightly, almost curious. Then he crouched, dipped 2 fingers into the paint, and dragged a line across his palm, slow and deliberate. When he lifted his hand, I saw it again, the bright orange cutting across the darkness of his skin, dripping between his fingers. That broke something in me. I turned and ran. The forest blurred into color and shadow. My heartbeat drowned everything else. Every snap of a twig behind me felt like a hand reaching for my collar. I didn't think. I just ran until the world tilted and I stumbled onto the road by my truck. I clawed at the door handle, my hands shaking so bad I missed twice before getting it open. I fell inside, slammed the door, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed to life. I looked back once, just once. He was standing at the start of the trail, still. Hand raised, paint dripping down his wrist. He didn't move as I hit the gas and tore down the gravel road, the tires spitting stones like sparks. I didn't ease off until I saw pavement under my wheels. When I got to my uncle's house, he was already at the door. He didn't ask why I was back early. He just stared at me like he already knew. His lips trembled, his eyes glassy, and for a second, I thought he might speak, but he didn't. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hand, bright orange across the dark, rising up from the trail. It's been a year now. I haven't gone back past that cattle gate. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind comes off the hills, I swear I can smell that paint again. And once, when I woke up around 2:17 a.m., I thought I saw a streak of orange on my front porch, shining under the moonlight, still wet.